let's jump into the book. As you mentioned, it's called Doomed to Fail: The Incredibly Loud History of Doom, Sludge, and Postmetal. Everyone listening to this podcast will be familiar with those terms, but I'm curious how you draw the distinction between a doom metal band, a sludge metal band, and a post metal band.
Yeah, that was one of the, hard questions of the book. And I think really before I started writing, well, I shouldn't say, but there definitely was a point like earlier on as a listener when I was definitely like one of the people who would say like, oh, doom, sludge, and like post metal, like it's just all like slow metal. And I can see like why you would make the distinctions, but really like if it's good, it's good. And then, realize it's all slow metal. But as I kind of like set out to write the history of doom metal, trying to like lump in Melvins and I Hate God and Grief, it just the more I looked at it, I could see more clearly that it was just coming from a different place. And so the kind of definitions that I came upon, and I'm definitely not the only person to think of them this way, but to me, a lot of the doom stuff, and you can trace this back to Black Sabbath. There's this kind of like reaching towards some kind of like larger spiritual truth or understanding, or some kind of maybe a light enlightenment or something like that. But a lot of doom, I like, is kind of has that spiritual bent to where there's this attempt to reach something larger. And so Black Sabbath, I think we're doing that, and then Pentagram, and on later into Trouble, who was a straight up Christian band. But if you just listen to Trouble without having any context or knowing anything about the band, I think most people would probably be surprised that they're a Christian band because it doesn't sound at all like you would imagine Christian metal to sound like. And then on later toward Candlemass, and now onto like Bell Witch and Yob, I feel like these are all bands that I would firmly place under the Doom umbrella. And there's all this one of the big things they have in common is that kind of reaching toward spiritual truth for someone in some way. And then in a lot of ways, when Melvins came out, it was kind of the opposite. It was coming straight from hardcore, and it was there was a lot more irony there, which I Hate God picked up on. And a lot of it was more just grounded in daily life. And I think I Hate God took that to an extreme in this really interesting way, where it was just way more about like social negativity and personal negativity, and really intense drug addiction, and just some of the most caustic emotions and kind of like human situations that are on Earth, essentially, is where that stuff comes from. And so, I mean, yeah, it's like I said, it's two very different places. And so I think there is a good reason to distinguish between doom and sludge in that way. And then, at the same time, the way like people have pushed sludge now, bands like Indian and Primitive Man, I still would call them sludge at the end of the day. But it can get pretty hazy for sure, as far as like what, is this doom or is it sludge? And to me, a lot of it kind of comes back to like what the bands are trying to examine, maybe in their lyrics, or what's their inspiration, what they're trying to get at. And then post metal, I think commonly has been, and I saw it this way too for a long time, essentially music that follows in ISIS or Neurosis's footprints of, utilizing like very quiet to very loud to intensify impact. And as I was thinking about the structure of the book, and it probably comes from, just going to school as an English major and kind of like studying postmodernism as just a art movement and like what that meant. I started thinking more about like post metal in terms of it, like along those lines. And so postmodernism, really a lot of it seeks to like kind of upset tropes or like common ways of approaching art or common ways that art works. And so I started thinking like a lot of the bands that I think are really interesting now are they just challenge, use the spirit of metal in some weird way that's just completely unexpected and flips it on its head in a lot of ways. And so as far as the definition of post metal in the book, that's how I approached it, is like slow music that is, has some kind of deconstructive bent to it, basically.
Can I give you my my pedantic, somewhat reductive definition or distinction between doom metal and sludge metal?
Yeah, of course. Love to hear it.
So I think the background of the bands has a lot to do with it, and realizing that a lot of sludge metal bands came from this kind of hardcore or punk rock background, I realized that a lot of sludge metal bands or sludge metal songs really just sound like hardcore songs slowed down, 300, 400%. And, to me, like, a doom metal band will write riffs and a sludge metal band will play chord progressions, except both incredibly down-tuned and distorted. But I think the approach and the background of the two genres is somewhat distinct. And of course, there's a lot of overlap, and things bleed into each other to the extent where are Sleep a sludge metal band or are they a doom metal band? They do a little bit of both. But I think, like, in terms of, if I see somebody with a with a grief or a dystopia T-shirt, I'm pretty sure that they came more from like the punk rock or hardcore side. And if I see somebody with I don't know, like a Trouble or I don't know, like a Down T-shirt, probably that they were Hesher growing up and got into doom metal that way.
Yeah, I think, part of me kind of wondered, like, is it silly to distinguish between them? And there's, plenty of musicians who they get kind of sick of like music writers and journalists like parsing the genres and trying to decide. But I think it's really a way of honoring, like you said, where the musicians are coming from, because it is way different. And to me, I think to recognize that is basically just appreciating the band on a different level.
So let's talk about the writing of the book. How long had you been working on it?
So let's see, it's kind of it's the very, very beginnings of it before I knew what it would turn into. And when I thought it would be a completely different book was in like summer of 2015. And I set out to write, I don't know if you know there's the music book series called 33 and a Third.
I don't. Can you tell me what those are?
Yeah, they're like these pocket-sized books essentially that are like deep dives into like one specific album. So there's one on Black Sabbath, Massive Reality by John Darnielle. That's really amazing. It's about most of them are like straightforward music journalism, but his is like this fictional account of a Hessian kid who his parents put him in a mental institution, and the book is him writing to the nurse about why he should get his Black Sabbath record back. And it's like fucking amazing. It's some of the best music writing I've ever read. But a lot of them are more, just straightforward, like I said, music journalism. And so, yeah, I've loved those books for a long time. And the publisher opened up submissions, and they want you to write this whole in-depth proposal that, to me, I did it twice. I tried once with Pantera, The Great Southern Trendkill, and then the second time was with I Hate God, Dope Sick. And the proposal, just the book proposal, ended up being like 30 single space pages with like they have you do a sample chapter and then like a table of contents and marketing plan and all this crazy shit to essentially make sure like your idea is solid and that it could be a full book. And so I did that on I Hate God, and they didn't pick it up, which is, is like pretty much expected because, they get such a high volume of submissions. And so after that got denied, I had all this writing about I Hate God, and I knew that I wanted to write some kind of book length thing on metal, like specifically, because like I said, my first book hits on it in a lot of ways, but it's also like a very narrative based book, and so I really wanted to focus primarily on the music. And so from there, I started to wonder if maybe I should write a biography on I Hate God. And I actually got a proposal for that together, and then sending it to the band, and they didn't like it. And in retrospect, I made a lot of kind of like rookie music journalist mistakes. I wrote about their drug use in a way that was not really like tactful or respectful.
Sorry, in fairness, it's very hard to talk about I Hate God without talking about the drug use.
Yeah, for sure. And so they didn't like that. And then also I have a complicated relationship with that band because, they have the song called White N-Word, and Jimmy Bower had a Confederate flag on his guitar forever, and they would put Confederate flags on their cabs at shows for a long time and all that stuff. And they always said it was, like ironic and in jest, but like the really when I was like in my earlier 20s and in college, I just started to realize more and more that like you can't use that type of stuff in irony, that no matter what, it's always incredibly damaging, especially to the people who are literally oppressed by those things. And so, and I've never been able to shake I Hate God as being one of my favorite bands because, they essentially invited me into music and gave me the confidence as a drummer to really pursue heavy music. And so I've had this really like, kind of push-pull relationship with them forever. And so in a nutshell, if I was going to write an I Hate God biography, it wasn't going to be just one-sided like they're the best band of all time, and it wouldn't have been just glorifying. And so I felt when I got the response back from the band, that was kind of ultimately more of the book. If they have somebody write a book on them, they were looking for more like a standard rock biography that wouldn't really like delve into the negativity. And really me as a listener, I've questioned tons of times whether I should even keep listening to them. And so in a nutshell, they weren't into that idea. And so again, I knew I wanted to write a full-length book about heavy music, and then I started thinking maybe I should write the Neurosis biography. And yeah, I learned from the I Hate God mishap and wrote a much better proposal. And I had met two of those guys before. And Noah Landis, the keyboarder, was very nice about the rejection. He essentially told me that if they have somebody do a Neurosis biography, it'd be somebody who's essentially like been with the band as a friend kind of from the really early years, which makes total sense to me. And so after those two rejections, again, I knew I really wanted to write a full-length book about metal. And so somewhere in that timeline, I read Choosing Death, Albert Mudrian's book about death metal and grindcore, and then I read Lords of Chaos and American Hardcore, and kind of these genre histories. And then it just hit me. It was just so obvious when I realized what I should do. I was like, oh yeah, like idiot, you should write the history of doom and sludge metal. Of course, that's the book. And then that really, like once that idea was in place, it was about 3 years to like from start to finish. Once I knew that's what the book was going to be, it took about years. But like really long answer, the idea was kind of percolating for really like almost 5 years. But yeah, like I said, once I realized I should be writing the history of doom and sludge, it took about 3 years to complete, and it was still a huge undertaking. But that gave me the opportunity. A band biography really does hinge on like having band involvement, unless it's like a bigger band like Guns N' Roses or something like that, where there's a ton of information out there. But something like I Hate God and Neurosis, which are like pretty huge bands for underground metal, there's still like not nearly enough information out there to write a full biography. I don't think without band cooperation, or at least a very good one. I don't know. Somebody could, I'm sure, prove me wrong. So writing the full history of the genres basically like opened up the possibility of like I could I would reach out to bands and hope they would be involved for interviews and be interested, but if they weren't, it also didn't really matter because I could still write a chapter on a band without necessarily having to interview everybody.